Just before I get to news, watch a quick update on these riots in the United States over the killing of George Floyd. Unfortunately, there are reports that a Las Vegas police officer is now in a critical condition after being shot during a nighttime protest. And police sources have told the Australian Associated Press the officer was involved in the shooting, but the Las Vegas Police Department has declined to confirm this officially. And 4 St. Louis police officers were also hit by gunfire late on Monday during some violent protests, so that's quite ugly. It's Newswatch. It seems, despite what you're hearing here, you've got a lot of media that seems to hate Donald Trump so much that you've got journalists cheering for the race rioters. That's how it seems to me. And that's even though journalists themselves are often a target for the rioters.
We're going to stick together here, media-wise. I'm sorry, guys. We're getting attacked on camera. We're getting attacked.
Nobody!
Oh, my God! That's our Madison underwear. Oh, my God! Help! Help!
But for many journalists, usually of the left, these protests do not seem to be really about justice for George Floyd, but revolution against Donald Trump. And the hysteria really is amazing. You won't believe this. Here is CNN presenter Don Lemon catastrophising about Trump, calling today for tough action to stop looting and that kind of bashing.
Open your eyes, America. Open your eyes. We are teetering on a dictatorship. This is chaos. Has the president, I'm listening, is the president declaring war on Americans?
Joining me is Gerard Henderson, columnist for the Australian newspaper, head of the Sydney Institute and author of the Media Watchdog blog. Gerard, thanks for your time. Is America teetering on a dictatorship, or is Don Lemon and so many others in the media teetering on the edge of their sanity?
Well, I think Don Lemon is teetering on the edge of hyperbole. Look, the situation, as you know, is changing rapidly in the United States, but the idea that President Trump is intending on establishing some kind of dictatorship is just ridiculous. I mean, the United States has states, it's got an independent judiciary, it's got independent police forces, and as you know, in the areas where most of the violence has taken place, and certainly where the killing of George Floyd took place, as I understand it, George Floyd took place. As I understand it, that's a democratic state. It's got a democratic governor. It's got a democratic mayor. It's got a police force that's run by the democratic administration. And a lot of the other problems have occurred in democratic states. So the idea that this is somehow the responsibility of President Trump in Washington, D.C. is preposterous. But the idea that he's going to set about a dictatorship, I see no evidence of that, but I see a lot of evidence of gross exaggerations among many journalists, including some Australian journalists who should know better.
Oh, unfortunately, yes. A couple of people at 7 and 9. I started the show, Gerard, by saying it seemed to me that some journalists of the ABC were almost inviting the protests now to spread to Australia. And I noticed too that Channel 10 this afternoon had its screens go blank and black in honour of George Floyd. Is that how you see it? There's almost a welcoming, an invitation for the protests to come here now?
Well, if you go back half a century, there always was a very derived notion to the left in Australia that the left in Australia in the late 60s through the 70s very much imitated the left-wing movements in the United States. In Australia, they weren't as violent. In the United States, they were frequently very violent. But the rhetoric was very similar, and the concept of the kind of protests that were engaged in is very similar. Now, we're talking here about half a century ago, when there were very serious riots and rioting and looting in the United States, as we know. So I'm not surprised that the Australian left is following the American left. It's been doing that for half a century, and I think we're seeing examples of it again. But the situations in the two nations, as you know, are totally different. Different. There are some Australian left-wing activists who would like to be able to imitate their left-wing colleagues in the United States, and we've seen that with the Antifa action organisations in Australia. So I think that's what we're going to see. I don't expect them anything like the United States, but this notion of imitation by our left of their left is common, but we don't have the we don't have the genuine protest movement involved in it as well, as you find among many African Americans.
Yeah, I'm going to have more to say about this at the very end of the show. But, Gerard, let's switch to the virus bans. They're slowly being lifted. And some ABC presenters, I don't get this, they're offended, Gerard, by seeing Treasurer Josh Frydenberg celebrating the reopening of pubs with a drink with AFL great Matthew Richardson. ABC News reader Juanita Phillips complained there's going to be a lot of Aussie blokes drinking beer and knockabout male Polly's having a cold one on TV News tonight. Probs, my least favourite cliche and one that really, truly does not represent the majority of us, by whom I mean I assume she means ABC types, I don't know. Yeah. And ABC executive Bhakti Puvanentharan made Frydenberg seem racist, saying, and we wonder why non-Anglo audiences turn away, as if there aren't such things as Tiger beer, Singer beer, beers made by non-Anglos all over the world. There seems to be, Gerard, a real animosity to a picture that for many Australian men, of many shades of colour, would represent a part of their culture.
Well, that's my own home territory down there around the Glenferrie Hotel, where I grew up for a long time as a boy and a young man. And when I last looked at Josh Frydenberg, he didn't seem very Anglo to me. I think he's background a Central European. But look, what you've got here is two things. You've got a situation where certain inner-city, essentially left-wing journalists look down on suburban Australians. And secondly, you've got this concept where people on the public payroll, on the taxpayer payroll, like Jacinta Phillips and others, have no idea of the struggle that men and women running businesses, small and medium-sized businesses, are having to put up with in the current economic downturn. And the idea that you would frown on the fact that the Treasurer is spending some of his very valuable time going in and celebrating that a ban on entertainment in a hotel has not been removed but has been slightly lifted just demonstrates how much so many ABC presenters and journalists are out of touch. It's a completely out-of-touch statement. And the idea that there's something wrong with men or women, and women these days drink as much in hotels as men that I notice, the idea that somehow there's something wrong in this is just shows how out of touch so many journalists are.
Well, I guess that if he'd been lifting a glass of Pinot Grigio instead, she'd have no complaints at all. I really think it's the beer that is offending her. This is not really Newswatch, but it is pub-related, so I'm maintaining the theme here, Gerard. Okay. And I can't resist it, you see. Here's Victorian Police Minister Lisa Neville on 3AW saying that if you protest for George Floyd, you will not be fined for breaking social distancing rules, as we saw those protesters in Sydney tonight. Have a listen.
You've got 10,000 people there. It's impossible to start doing infringements without it causing massive safety issues for police.
Well, I don't know about 10,000, but Gerard, if you join a big group at the pub with Josh and Richo, you're going to be fined. Have a listen to this.
We've got 100 people at a pub. Absolutely, they'll be in there enforcing it.
The right priorities, Gerard?
Well, I think, sadly, it says a lot about the state of justice in the state of Victoria, my old state, that you get the police minister saying this. I mean, if this police minister is seriously concerned about a virus spreading, she should be more concerned about a large demonstration than a small social get-together. I mean, that should be the concern. The police should be out there breaking it up. That would be the concern. If the story is, if the issue is a medical issue, that's where the priority would be. But it's not. Essentially, it's a bossing attitude, that it's quite easy to boss 100 people in a hotel in suburban Melbourne than it is to handle 500 or 1,000 demonstrators on the streets of Melbourne. So, I mean,
let me just point out, Gerard.
Yep.
You made me realise the Victorian Police actually did break up a demonstration against the bans that was held outside Parliament House, much smaller, and they broke that up. But they won't break this up. They won't break this up. Gerard Henderson, thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure, thank you.
Now, there's one more thing I need to say about this kind of race politics. And one of the worst things about it is that you're asked to choose. You're almost demanded that you choose. are you on the black side or the white side? Are you the racist or the non-racist? The answer should be you're on neither side. I will not fight in your race war, because this war is not at all what we're told, a war between racists and anti-racists, because I am seeing racists on both sides.